Terrell Monroe was just 19 when his Ivy League professor laughed in his face, then told the entire class he'd wasted their time with a fake math theory. But what if that fake theory was the key to rewriting modern science? Overnight, he's not just a student, he's a national scandal. They called him arrogant, delusional, dangerous. And now, the Pentagon just leaked proof they've weaponized his math. What happens when a black genius exposes the system, and the system strikes back? Before we deep dive into this interesting story, subscribe to our channel, and tell us where are you watching from. Share in the comments below. It was supposed to be a routine Thursday morning in room 3B of Wentworth Hall at the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences, a place that prided itself on tradition, prestige, and perfection. The kind of place where future theorists, engineers, and codebreakers were molded. But for Terrell Monroe, a 19-year-old sophomore and the only black student in his advanced mathematical theory course, it was more than just another lecture. It was the day he would challenge the very rules of the system, not just academic, but social. The room was quiet as Dr. Ellison Graves paced in front of a whiteboard cluttered with symbols and linear equations. His graying temples and pressed suit gave him a commanding presence, but there was always something colder beneath his professionalism. When Terrell raised his hand, a few students shifted in their seats, already bracing for what came next. Terrell didn't hesitate. His voice was clear, even as nerves fluttered in his stomach. I've been working on an alternative interpretation of the convergence failure in K-series projections. I think I found a consistent method that factors in rotational decay of secondary variables. Silence. Graves turned, marker still in hand. You think you found a new interpretation? He dragged a last word out as if it were drenched in sarcasm. Terrell nodded, unfolding a small stack of printed notes. It came to me after I analyzed divergence through radial decay and iterative functions. If we treat the decay not as a loss but as a shift in dimensional flow, Graves cut him off with a sharp chuckle. The sound echoed in the sterile lecture hall. Oh, I see. So now you're rewriting the fundamentals of applied math. The smile that followed was razor-thin, brittle. Ladies and gentlemen, he turned to the class. We have a revolutionary among us. Laughter broke out across the room. Not loud, not cruel, not yet, but cruel in its indifference. The kind of laughter that came from white students who had never been asked to prove their worth. Terrell stood frozen, every instinct inside him screaming to sit down, to apologize, to disappear. But he didn't. I'm not claiming to rewrite anything, he said, voice low but unshaken. I'm just proposing a different view. One supported by data. Graves raised an eyebrow. Your data, Mr. Monroe? Yes, sir. Well, the professor said, circling the desk like a predator sizing up its prey. Perhaps next time you'll run your little thought experiments by someone qualified before wasting class time. The room fell deathly silent. Terrell sat down, his notes still in hand, unshared, unread. No one defended him. Not one of the 26 other students, mostly white, mostly quiet, dared to make eye contact. They were watching him drown, and many seemed to believe he deserved it. For his confidence, for his color, or perhaps both. The bell rang. As students filed out, some whispered. Others smirked. One muttered, "Dude really thought he was Einstein." Terrell caught it, but didn't react. His chest burned, not with shame, but something older, deeper. The feeling black men carried in spaces where brilliance was either unexpected or denied. He walked back to his dorm alone, the sounds of the city drowned beneath the storm inside his head. He wasn't angry at Graves. He had expected resistance, but the laughter, that communal, synchronized dismissal, cut deeper than he thought possible. Still, there was something unshaken beneath the wounds. He knew what he had seen in the numbers, knew the math didn't lie. By evening, Terrell sat at his desk, lights dimmed, laptop open. The same equations sprawled across digital pages, marked with red highlights, and hastily scribbled notes. But now, he began refining them, not to prove Graves wrong, but to prove himself right. The shame didn't disappear, but it transmuted into resolve. He wasn't just going to finish the work. He was going to make them regret laughing. At midnight, a knock came at the door. It was unexpected. Terrell opened it cautiously. Standing there was a tall, thin man, with horn-rimmed glasses and a frayed brown coat. He looked vaguely familiar, like a forgotten memory. "Terrell Monroe?" he asked quietly.
Yes?
"I was auditing your class today, visiting from NYU." He extended a small USB drive. I thought you might want a copy of what happened. Terrell frowned. A copy of the lecture, the man said with a knowing nod. I recorded it. Thought it might be useful. You see, sometimes humiliation becomes history. If you share it with the world. Before Tyrell could respond, the man was gone. Curious, he plugged in the drive. A single video file appeared. Graves laughs. Student shuts down lecture. The timestamp matched exactly. The entire exchange. Crystal clear. Unedited. Without much thought, Tyrell uploaded it to his private cloud folder. What he didn't know, what he couldn't have predicted, was that the man had already uploaded his own copy to an anonymous academic forum with millions of members. And by sunrise, the video had begun to spread like wildfire. A visiting professor secretly records the lecture and uploads the clip online. By dawn, the quiet of campus was broken, not by the usual chatter of students rushing to class, but by laughter echoing from glowing phone screens. In dorm lounges, libraries, and cafeterias, everyone seemed to be watching the same clip. Terrell Monroe, standing in front of Dr. Graves's class, trying to plain his radical math theory, only to be cut off and laughed at. The moment had been reduced to a meme. The caption read, "When you think you're Einstein but end up being a TikTok equation." Terrell didn't even know at first. He woke up to over 300 messages, most unreadable. His phone buzzed relentlessly, the battery draining under the weight of public humiliation. By noon, his name was trending on Twitter, under Den Math Maniac, and Graves destroyed him. Students from other universities reposted the clip with reaction videos, adding mocking commentary, sound effects, even remixes. Some laughed. Others took it further. One tweet read, "This is what happens when DI admits students who can't handle real math." Another, "He should have stuck to basketball instead of numbers." Tyrell stared at the comments, numb. Every insult felt personal, as if the entire internet had collectively decided to brand his intelligence a joke. His hands trembled as he scrolled through the flood of cruelty. Some anonymous, some from classmates he'd worked with on projects, smiling faces now hiding behind mocking memes. By the end of the day, his email inbox was filled with messages from university administrators. One subject line froze him. Urgent. Financial aid status review. When he opened it, his stomach dropped. One of the private donors who funded his scholarship had temporarily suspended their contribution pending a review of his academic professionalism and public conduct. It didn't even mention the racism he could feel pulsing beneath the words. It didn't have to. The message was clear. He was too controversial, too loud, too black, too visible. He went to see his academic advisor, Professor Monroe, no relation, a kind older woman, who looked at him with both sympathy and fear. "Tyrell," she said softly, "this has gotten bigger than a misunderstanding. The board is asking questions. They want to know why you were challenging Dr. Graves so publicly." "Challenging?" Tyrell said bitterly. "I asked a question. I presented an idea." She sighed. "They don't see it that way. The university wants stability. Sponsors are nervous. Graves is connected." That word, connected, hung in the air, like a verdict. By evening, Tyrell locked himself in his dorm room. The blinds were drawn. His laptop glowed faintly in the dimness. He opened his notebooks, the ones full of scribbled equations and margins filled with desperate ideas. Each page was a battlefield. Proofs, revisions, calculations that might mean nothing, or everything. He stared at them until the numbers blurred into shapes, then into anger, then into resolve. He replayed the moment in class over and over in his head. The laughter, the condescension, the smirk on Graves's face. It wasn't just academic dismissal. It was personal degradation. It said, "You don't belong here." And yet deep down he knew he wasn't wrong. The equations in his notes had a rhythm, a pulse, something elegant beneath the chaos. He spent the next few nights reworking every detail, isolating variables, recalculating projections, stripping the idea down to its bones. The world was laughing, but he wasn't done. On the third night, his mom called from Detroit. He didn't want to answer, but she called again and again, until he picked up. "Baby," her voice trembled through the line. "I saw the video. Your aunt showed me. Why didn't you tell me first?" Tyrell leaned back, exhausted. "Because there's nothing to tell, Ma." They laughed. "That's it. They're laughing at you, Tyrell. Those people don't care about the truth. You need to stay quiet for a while. Let it die down. Please." He rubbed his forehead. "If I stay quiet, it means they're right." They're always gonna think they're right, she said, voice cracking. That's the world, son. You don't have to prove them wrong every time. But Tyrell wasn't listening anymore. He could hear the faint echo of laughter in his head again, like it was playing on loop somewhere deep inside him. He hung up softly before she could say more. He turned back to his desk. There a stack of notes waited, proofs that refused to die. He whispered to himself, I'm not done. Hours turned into days. Days into a strange, sleepless rhythm. The university cafeteria staff began to notice he rarely showed up for meals. Friends texted once, then stopped. Even the few classmates who had once admired his talent now avoided eye contact. They didn't want to be associated with the viral math kid. The racism was no longer hidden behind polite academic language. It was now bold, raw, and vicious. When Tyrell checked the campus subreddit, a thread about him read, "Why do we keep giving scholarships to these diversity hires who embarrass the school? Affirmative action math. When you skip numbers for feelings." The cruelty was casual, amusing, invisible to those who weren't its target. But the thing about humiliation is it can become fuel. Late one night, as the city lights flickered through his window, Tyrell finally saw it. A tiny gap in his previous equations. Something Graves had missed. Something no one had noticed because they weren't looking for it. His pulse quickened. His calculations, when adjusted, started converging. The math made sense. He wasn't delusional. He was right. He leaned back in his chair, heart racing. "I knew it," he whispered. "I knew it." He reached for his phone, instinctively wanting to share it. But who would listen now? Every account of his was flooded with hate. His DMs were filled with racial slurs and fake advice from trolls pretending to help. He was an online punchline, not a scholar. Still, he wasn't ready to give up. He began typing an anonymous paper submission under a pseudonym, using a temporary email. If he couldn't be heard as Tyrell Monroe, he'd be heard as Noah. Hours later, his roommate, Jordan, knocked lightly on the door. "Man, you okay?" Tyrell didn't answer. "I saw the thread," Jordan continued quietly. "It's messed up what they're saying. You don't deserve that." Tyrell finally looked up. "Doesn't matter. They already decided what I am." Jordan stepped inside, uneasy. "You're not gonna do something crazy, right?" Tyrell gave a bitter smile. "Crazy? No. I'm gonna finish my math." Jordan nodded, uncertainly, and backed out. Tyrell knew what he was thinking. Everyone thought the same thing now. Either he was broken or unstable. It didn't matter that his numbers were right. When you're black in academia, perception becomes your prison. By sunrise, he'd submitted his anonymous draft to an open-access academic forum. He titled it "Dimensional Decay in Secondary Rotational Systems." No name, no affiliation, just the map. Then, drained, he fell asleep at his desk. When he woke up, there was an email waiting in his inbox. Subject line: "I watched the video. I read your math." He frowned, scrolling through the message. It was from someone named Dr. Halbert Sloan, a name that sounded faintly familiar. The email was short, almost cryptic. "Don't change a thing. You might be onto something big. Let's talk." Tyrell stared at the screen, disbelief mixing with hope. For the first time in weeks, he wasn't being laughed at. Someone, a stranger, had looked past the noise and seen the numbers. He didn't know it yet, but this email would change everything. A retired black mathematician reaches out, saying, "You might be onto something big." The first Zoom call came just after midnight. Tyrell sat hunched at his desk, eyes bloodshot, head heavy from sleep deprivation and caffeine. When the screen flickered to life, a grainy webcam image revealed a shadowy figure surrounded by piles of old journals, framed degrees, and yellowed paper stuck to the wall like conspiracy maps. The man had salt and pepper hair that refused to be tamed, wire-rimmed glasses perched crookedly on his nose, and a gaze so sharp it felt like it could cut through equations. "Tyrell Monroe," the voice rasped. "You've got a dangerous mind." Tyrell sat straighter. "You're Dr. Halbert Sloan." The man nodded slowly. "I used to be. Before they erased me." There was no small talk. No warm-up. Sloan launched straight into the math. For the next hour, he dissected Tyrell's paper line by line, not to tear it apart, but to dig deeper. To Tyrell's shock, Sloan didn't just understand the work. He was building on it in real time, throwing variables into the margins, reconfiguring equations like a man possessed. "Your decay model," Sloan muttered, circling a matrix with a red marker he held like a scalpel. "It's not a collapse. It's a shift. Lateral entropy movement. You know what this could mean?" I think so, Tyrell said, though his mind was spinning. No, you don't, Sloan snapped. Because if you did, you'd know you've stepped on the third rail of modern physics, and math doesn't like to be changed, especially not by people like us. Tyrell swallowed hard. He'd heard the whispers about Sloan, how he had once worked at NASA, then vanished after accusing the agency of burying research from black scientists. They said he'd gone mad. A conspiracy theorist. But nothing about the man felt mad. He felt dangerous. Brilliant. Burned. That night was the beginning. Each evening, while the rest of campus slept, Tyrell and Sloan connected, diving deeper into proofs, theories, and what Sloan called the bones of the lie. Sloan introduced him to archived journals, hidden theorems, and stories of mathematicians whose names had been quietly scrubbed from history books. Black scientists, indigenous thinkers, Latina engineers, all whose ideas had been stolen, buried, or dismissed as fantasy. This field was built to erase us. Sloan growled one night. And every time someone like you rises, they tighten the screws. By week 3, Tyrell's head buzzed constantly. Between classes, backlash, and these nightly marathons of truth and math, he barely slept. His eyes burned, his hands ached from writing. But for the first time in his life, he felt seen, not just for his talent, but for the threat that talent posed to a system built to exclude him. Meanwhile, outside his bubble, the storm was still brewing. His name had become a dog whistle in alt-right academic spaces. YouTube videos titled "Affirmative Action Math is Dangerous" gained millions of views. Podcasters dissected his lecture clip, painting him as the poster child of academic entitlement. One particularly vicious article read, "Tyrell Monroe is not the first minority to mistake confidence for competence. He is, however, the most dangerous, because he believes he's right." Tyrell tried to ignore it. But the emails didn't stop. Nor did the racist memes, or the digital lynch mobs calling him a fraud, a threat, a diversity hire gone rogue. He asked Sloan one night, "Why do they hate me so much? They don't even know me." Sloan leaned in, his expression hard as stone. "Because they don't need to know you. You're not a person to them. You're a correction. And they don't want to be corrected." That truth settled in Tyrell's chest like a weight he didn't know how to carry.
They kept working.
Slowly their private folder of findings grew, pages of math that defied expectations, models that simulated behaviors no one had theorized before. One night, as Tyrell rearranged a matrix function and applied an obscure transformation Sloan had found in a forgotten 1971 thesis, something strange happened. The energy values stabilized in a repeating pattern. Sloan froze. "Wait, run that again." Tyrell did. And again, and again. Each time, the numbers returned with a precision that couldn't be random. "What are we looking at?" Tyrell asked, heart pounding. Sloan didn't speak. He just stared, his lips slightly parted. Then he turned, rifled through a stack of notes, and pulled out a dusty file folder labeled "Unclear, Nonlinear Decay Hypothesis." He flipped through pages until he found a printout of a simulation from decades ago. The decay pattern, it matched. "You're not just predicting rotational decay," Sloan whispered. "You're modeling energy fluctuations inside nuclear particles. No one's ever done that. Not like this." Tyrell leaned back, stunned. "Are you serious? This isn't a math trick. This is physical behavior. You're showing a theoretical model that could explain unaccounted-for quantum anomalies." Tyrell felt like the room tilted. "Someone else must have found this already," he said. "Right?" Sloan's eyes narrowed. "If they did, they buried it. Or they stole it. Either way, this isn't just math anymore. This is science. And now we've got a problem." A deep chill settled over Tyrell's skin. He knew they were building something powerful, but he hadn't realized it could touch fields far beyond numbers on a board. They were stepping into physics, energy, even weaponry. The implications were massive. Dangerous. Sloan knew it too. "We need to go dark," he said. "No more uploads, no more emails, only encrypted channels. From here on out, we don't trust anyone." Tyrell nodded, though his pulse was racing. He understood now. They weren't just proving a theory. They were unearthing a truth the world wasn't ready to accept, especially not from a black college kid and a disgraced old mathematician. And someone, somewhere, was going to try to stop them. Dr. Sloan stumbles across a pattern that proves Tyrell's math predicts energy fluctuations in nuclear particles, something no student has ever touched. Tyrell sat in front of his laptop, hands hovering over the keyboard like they were about to touch fire. Sloan had reviewed every line of the revised theory 5 times over. They'd scrubbed it clean of anything traceable. No names, no affiliations, no race, just the math. It was the same theory that had predicted particle energy fluctuations. Now expanded, refined, and presented with clear real-world implications. If published, it could alter the direction of multiple research sectors. And yet, Tyrell hesitated before submitting it. Sloane's voice had been grave. Send it anonymously. If they think it's from you, or worse, from me, it won't stand a chance. But if they believe it came from someone white, or neutral, they'll bend over backwards to praise it. Tyrell had replied bitterly. So my math is only brilliant if I'm invisible? Sloane didn't answer. He didn't have to. They submitted it under the pseudonym A.E. Clark, an untraceable alias, with no academic history. The paper was titled Rotational Decay Patterns and Predictive Energy Behavior in Subatomic Systems. They uploaded it to a respected physics journal, known for its rigorous peer review process. Then began the wait. Weeks crawled by. In the meantime, Sloane insisted they go underground. We stirred something we shouldn't have, he warned. Too many eyes on us now. Tyrell noticed encrypted messages coming in at strange hours. Sloane stopped using his real name altogether. But what unnerved Tyrell most wasn't the secrecy. It was how his world was beginning to warp. One of his professors stopped acknowledging him in lectures. Another canceled their joint research meeting without explanation. Friends on campus began to avoid him, walking the other way in hallways, leaving group chats without a word. Then the email arrived. Just 5 words in the subject line. Submission status rejected. Tyrell's hands shook as he opened it. There was no detailed feedback, no academic critique, just a single line. This kind of work doesn't belong in our field.
That was it.
No footnotes, no reviewer names, no mention of errors or flaws, just the unmistakable scent of exclusion, dressed in the plain language of institutional rejection. Tyrell's chest felt like it was caving in. He forwarded the email to Sloane asking, did they even read it? Sloane responded 2 minutes later, oh, they read it. They just realized who really wrote it. The silence that followed was suffocating. The next day, Dr. Graves stood at the front of the lecture hall like a man who had already won the war. His eyes met Tyrell's for a fraction of a second, and then slid past him as if he wasn't there. By that afternoon, Tyrell's swipe card access to the campus research lab was revoked. No explanation. Just an automated email from the university's IT department. When he inquired about it, the lab supervisor, a professor who once praised his work, shrugged and said, I'm sorry, Ty. We're under pressure to prioritize more stable projects. That word again. Stable. It echoed from headlines the next morning. The Boston Collegiate ran a piece titled, Angry Student Challenges Faculty with Fringe Theories. The article didn't name Tyrell, but everyone knew who it was about. It described him as a disruptive force, a divisive presence in the classroom, and implied that his actions were part of a personal vendetta against white professors. A few quotes were anonymously sourced from fellow students, no doubt, the same ones who used to study with him. The alt-right internet jumped on it instantly. Hashtags like John Tyrell theory and black math hoax began trending again. Some accused him of trying to destabilize academia with racialized propaganda. Others compared him to conspiracy theorists and called for his expulsion. Even mainstream outlets picked it up, reframing the story as a debate about the boundaries of free thought in elite academic institutions. On panel shows, commentators said things like, we welcome diversity, but not disruption. One even said, is it brilliance or delusion? That's the line we have to draw. No one wanted to talk about the math, not the accuracy, not the potential, just the optics of a black student challenging authority. Tyrell's inbox flooded again, but this time the messages were colder, less mocking, more dangerous. You want to play scientist? Try it without a lab. This isn't Wakanda, bro. Stay in your lane. Hope your scholarship survives this mess. That last one wasn't just a threat. It was a warning. Later that week, Tyrell was called into a private meeting with the Office of Student Affairs. A neatly dressed woman with a practiced smile and cold eyes told him his scholarship was now under review due to behavior that reflects poorly on the institution. When he asked for clarification, she handed him a folder filled with printed tweets, TikTok comments, and screenshots of the memes. It's about perception, Mr. Monroe, regardless of your intentions. Tyrell walked out of the office feeling like every wall had closed in. The university wasn't just turning its back, it was pushing him out the door, one quiet step at a time. He called Sloan later that night. His voice was hoarse from holding back emotion. "They've made me radioactive," he said. "I'm being erased." "No," Sloan said. "You're being punished. It's not the same. One you survive. The other you outlast." Terrell clenched his jaw. "What do we do?" "We keep going," Sloan answered. "They want to bury you in silence. So we get louder, but smarter." But even as they spoke, another shadow crept closer. At a small independent journal office in Philadelphia, a junior editor named Camille Hartley sat in a supply closet, whispering into her phone. Her voice trembled, but her conscience was louder than her fear. She had flagged Tyrell's paper the moment it arrived in their system. The math was too good, too precise to ignore. She'd argued to push it forward, but the senior editors overruled her. She saw their eyes shift when the analysis hinted at concepts previously touched by Dr. Halbert Sloan. Now she had called Sloan directly. Her voice was barely above a whisper. "We didn't reject it for the math," she said. "We rejected it because it's yours." A junior editor from the journal calls Sloan and whispers, "We didn't reject it for the math. We rejected it because it's yours." Terrell had been told to stay quiet. The university wanted things to cool down. The math community had already closed its doors, and Sloan's warnings had grown increasingly urgent. "They're watching you. They're waiting for you to make a mistake." But silence was killing him faster than the backlash ever could. Terrell had spent the last few weeks shrinking. Each day he said less, walked faster, avoided eye contact. His name, once whispered with curiosity and envy on campus, now triggered discomfort and side eyes. It wasn't just academic ridicule anymore. It was social exile. He had become radioactive, the living embodiment of what happened when a black student dared to reach beyond the invisible line. So when Camille Hartley's whispered phone call confirmed what he and Sloan had feared all along, that the system wasn't rejecting his math because it was wrong, but because it was his, something inside him snapped back into place. He was done hiding. That night, Tyrell opened his laptop and typed 5 simple words across a blank screen. "This theory belongs to me." He connected his webcam, adjusted his mic, and clicked go live. There was no flashy setup, no dramatic intro music, just Tyrell, sitting at his desk in a hoodie, under the yellow glow of a desk lamp, surrounded by chalkboard panels and printed equations taped to his wall. His voice shook at first, but gained strength with each sentence. "For those who don't know me," he began, "I'm Tyrell Monroe. And what you've seen online, the clip of me being laughed out of class, the memes, the headlines, that's not the whole story. This is..." Over the next hour he walked viewers through a simplified version of his model, stripping down the most advanced parts, using clear visuals, accessible language, and live calculations. He didn't shout, he didn't rant, he didn't even mention the racism that had tried to crush him. He let the math speak, and when he reached the final proof, the one that predicted energy fluctuations at the subatomic level, he paused. "This," he said, holding up a sheet of paper, "is the same framework that's been dismissed, rejected, and erased. Not because it doesn't work, but because of who it came from." He ended the stream with a simple challenge: try it, replicate it, prove me wrong. By the time he went to sleep that night, the video had 7. By morning it had 2.3 million. 2 days later, it crossed 4 million and counting. But the response wasn't what he'd hoped for. Yes, some viewers praised the clarity, the brilliance, but they were drowned out by others. Comment after comment mocked his appearance, his voice, his intellect. This is what happens when Black Twitter does STEM. The only energy he's predicting is failure. I've seen better math on bathroom walls. The hate was targeted, vicious, and coordinated. Within hours, Tyrell's address, phone number, and class schedule were leaked online. Photos of his mother's home in Detroit appeared on message boards. Someone even posted fake nudes with his name in the watermark. It wasn't just academic retaliation anymore. It was psychological warfare. Sloan called, frantic. "They've activated the network. You shook their tree, and now they're throwing everything at you. Don't go outside alone." Terrell tried to file a report with campus security, but the officer on duty barely looked up from his desk. "You shouldn't be live streaming controversial stuff if you're worried about safety," the man said with a shrug. 2 days later, Tyrell received an official notice from the university. Indefinite suspension pending review for creating an unsafe campus environment.
The words felt like a punch to the chest.
It didn't matter that he was the one being threatened. It didn't matter that he'd followed the academic code to the letter. The school had found its excuse to remove him, one he had delivered. Willingly, in the name of truth, Sloan offered to help him relocate. "We can go full ghost," he said. "Use secure servers, offshore proxies, new aliases. They can't kill the work if we stay mobile." But Tyrell refused. This time he said, "I want them to see me." And then, something changed. Quietly, without fanfare, Tyrell's inbox began to fill, not with hate but with questions, curious messages, requests to access his full proofs. Most were from unfamiliar names: professors in Nigeria, graduate students in Brazil, a physicist from South Africa, a black engineer in the UK. They weren't just watching, they were working. And they were replicating his results. One email stood out. It was from a Senegalese-born researcher in Germany, who wrote, "We reran your decay matrix model. It's holding. This isn't a hoax, it's a breakthrough." Then another. "We integrated your projection with a hydrogen entropy simulation. The output stabilized, exactly as you predicted." A private Discord server formed, comprised of black and brown scientists across the globe. They didn't wait for mainstream approval. They began peer-reviewing Tyrell's work on their own terms, line by line, function by function. They weren't just confirming it, they were improving it. But the academic elite remained silent. No apologies, no reversals. Dr. Graves, when approached by a student journalist, scoffed and said, "I don't respond to TikTok celebrities." The mainstream media, meanwhile, painted Tyrell as a provocateur. News anchors debated whether radical live streamers were compromising the integrity of science. One editorial headline read, "When activism masquerades as academia." Tyrell sat through it all with a grim calm. He had lost his scholarship. He had lost his university. But in losing those things, he had gained something far more dangerous: visibility, without their permission. Then, 3 nights after his suspension, an anonymous email arrived. There was no subject line, no sender name, just one sentence: "You've just solved what we've been hiding for years." Attached was a PDF, redacted, government-sealed, marked confidential, DOECSC and PF4M. Tyrell opened the document slowly, his heart pounding, as pages revealed line after line of mirrored equations, his decay patterns, his matrix projections, dated years before his live stream. And yet, identical. At the bottom, a note written in small, tight handwriting. "This is the model we've been trying to suppress. You weren't wrong. You were early." Tyrell leaned back in his chair, speechless. The air in the room shifted. Everything he thought he knew about what was happening, the racism, the ridicule, the silence, was still true. But now something darker loomed. He hadn't just threatened academia. He had stumbled into a secret the government itself had tried to bury. A whistleblower inside a federal research lab emails Tyrell, "You've just solved what we've been hiding for years." The confidential PDF from the whistleblower hadn't just confirmed Tyrell's theory. It had exposed a hidden war within the scientific establishment. Tyrell reread the redacted sections a dozen times, and each time the implications grew heavier. His work, independently derived, unsupported and ridiculed, matched data the Department of Energy had labeled classified level 3 nearly 8 years ago. The patterns he had found through stubborn, sleepless nights had already been discovered, buried, and stamped into secrecy, and now he had revived them, loudly, publicly, and unapologetically. The whistleblower never responded to Tyrell's cautious reply. No name, no follow-up, just digital smoke fading into the ether. But the message was clear: the stakes had shifted. Tyrell had gone from an academic embarrassment to a national liability. He shared the file with Sloan, who reacted as if someone had punched him in the gut. "They buried it," Sloan muttered, pacing across his cluttered living room. "This was supposed to be the keystone to fourth phase thermal mechanics. They shelved it to protect the status quo." "Do you know how long I suspected this?" Tyrell nodded slowly. "But why keep it hidden?" "Because it undermines everything they've invested in," Sloan said, voice sharp. "Whole energy sectors, military applications, patent wars. This math could change the entire game." And the implications were immense. Tyrell's decay matrix had opened a new way of modeling energy behavior, particularly in unstable systems. It had potential uses in improving battery life, reducing energy waste in reactors, and even building renewable systems that could operate without traditional cooling mechanisms. In simple terms, the foundation of thermodynamics had a crack in it, and Tyrell had drawn the line straight through. But recognition didn't follow. Silence did. Government agencies stopped returning calls. A quiet blackout descended on the Discord servers Tyrell had joined, as more researchers received cease and desist letters from their institutions. Several scientists who had messaged him about supporting the theory suddenly vanished from his inbox. One of them, a black woman working in Denmark, sent a final note before disappearing. "They warned me to distance myself. I'm sorry. You're on your own." The academic world didn't engage. It erased. And where it couldn't erase, it smeared. Mainstream media launched a slow but deliberate campaign. Articles framed Tyrell as unstable, a cautionary tale of a young man spiraling under the weight of internet fame. Editorials ran titles like "Genius or Grifter," "The Troubling Case of Tyrell Monroe," "Conspiracy in Calculus, a Dangerous Obsession." Pundits mocked his livestream, comparing it to science fiction. One TV host laughed openly. "He's either the next Einstein or the next flat earther." It was character assassination dressed as commentary. But even in the shadows, his work pulsed forward. One day, Sloan forwarded Tyrell a link to a Swedish scientific journal, an elite high-barrier platform that rarely touched unproven theories. Inside was a dense, 42-page paper titled "Reinterpreting Thermal Degradation Through Decay Matrix Reformulation." The author, Dr. Henrik Wahlgren, one of Europe's most respected physicists. On page 6, buried within the references, a name appeared. "Initial projections by Tyrell Monroe, Independent United States." Tyrell blinked, stunned. "He cited me?" Sloan grinned. "He didn't just cite you. He used your math as the base of his paper." Quietly, but clearly. Wahlgren hadn't contacted Tyrell, hadn't announced support publicly, but the reference was real. It was like a silent nod from the top of the mountain, a signal that someone up there saw him and didn't laugh. But it wasn't celebration that followed. 3 days later, Tyrell received a letter, hand-delivered by courier to his off-campus apartment. Thick ivory envelope, embossed seal. Inside, one page with formal language. "You are hereby summoned to appear before the Scientific Ethics Oversight Committee of the American Physics Association to respond to an inquiry concerning the alleged theft of proprietary academic research." Tyrell read the sentence 3 times. "Theft?" he whispered. "They think I stole my own idea?" He showed the letter to Sloan, whose face went pale. "They're flipping it," Sloan muttered. "They're accusing you of reverse plagiarism, claiming your theory was pulled from previously classified or restricted research. The redacted DOE report. They're making it look like you copied them. But it's mine," Tyrell said quietly. "They never published it, never released it. I proved it independently." "That won't matter," Sloan replied. "They don't need the truth. They need to destroy your credibility before you become too real to discredit." Tyrell sat down hard, eyes unfocused. He had fought for his place, fought to be heard. Now, after losing his scholarships, his university, his safety, he was being dragged in front of a panel, not as a pioneer but as a thief. "This is madness," he whispered. "No," Sloan said. "This is control." There was a silence between them. Long, heavy. Then Sloan stepped closer. "But we're not going to walk into that committee begging. We're going to walk in armed with data, with timestamps, with evidence. If they want a trial, we'll give them a reckoning." Tyrell didn't respond. His eyes were locked on the letter, the words blurring. This wasn't just an academic attack. It was erasure on an institutional level. They didn't just want to silence him. They wanted to make sure he had never existed in the first place. Tyrell receives a summons to testify before a scientific ethics committee about theft of his own idea. The hearing room didn't look like a courtroom, but it felt like one. Cold, clinical, lit with sterile white bulbs that flickered slightly overhead. The air smelled of printer toner and quiet judgment. Tyrell Monroe sat alone at a long mahogany table, a single nameplate in front of him. Respondent, Tyrell Monroe. Across the room, a semicircle of 9 individuals faced him from elevated chairs, men and women in tailored suits, their expressions unreadable. Above them, a screen glowed with a digital banner, Scientific Ethics Oversight Committee. Inquiry into alleged intellectual misconduct. To Tyrell, it felt less like an inquiry, and more like an execution. Sloan had warned him. They're not here to listen. They're here to discredit. He had coached Tyrell through every possible line of questioning, helped compile documents, emails, version logs, IP stamps, even drafts of the original equations. They had built a wall of proof. But when the hearing began, none of that seemed to matter. "Mr. Monroe," said the chairwoman, Dr. Carmen Gellert, with the crisp cadence of someone used to control, "you are here today to respond to concerns raised by multiple members of the international scientific community regarding the provenance of your decay matrix theory." Tyrell responded clearly, firmly. "I derived it independently. All my notes and timestamps are documented. My work predates any recent publications claiming similar outcomes." She nodded, without reaction. "Let's begin with your live stream." They played a short clip. Tyrell watched himself on the screen, mid-sentence, explaining decay symmetry to an invisible audience. The tone was calm, the visuals compelling, but the way it was framed, paused and analyzed made it feel damning, like evidence at a trial, rather than a moment of learning. One by one, the committee members took turns questioning him. Some asked technical questions framed not as genuine inquiries but as traps. Others went after his credibility, referencing the viral nature of his video, his academic suspension, the backlash. "Why didn't you submit your theory through appropriate academic channels?" one member asked. "I did," Tyrell replied. "It was rejected with no critique." "And why do you believe it was rejected?" Tyrell paused. "Because of who I am, not what I wrote." There was a rustle in the room, small, but noticeable. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. "Please welcome to the stand," the chairwoman said. Dr. Henrik Wahlgren, the Swedish physicist, entered from a side door, dressed in a charcoal gray suit, his silver hair swept back like a man unbothered by storms. Tyrell sat up straight. This was the man who had quietly cited him. Surely Wahlgren would speak the truth. But what followed felt like betrayal carved into marble. Dr. Gellert asked, "Dr. Wahlgren, did you base your work on Mr. Monroe's theory?" Wahlgren adjusted his mic and said, without blinking, "No, I did not." Tyrell's heart sank. The chairwoman pressed, "Are you aware of his live stream that predates your publication?" "I am now," Wahlgren said. "But I never saw it before writing my paper. Any similarities are coincidental or derived from shared scientific speculation." Tyrell's fists clenched under the table. He wanted to shout, to pull up the email thread that Sloan had intercepted. Timestamped had forwarded from Wahlgren's lab server, containing quotes lifted verbatim from Tyrell's notes. But when Sloan had offered to present it, the committee refused. "Chain of custody unclear," they said. "We cannot admit potentially tampered documents." Instead, Wahlgren's words stood unchallenged. Tyrell sat still, shoulders tight, breathing shallow. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a performance, each scene scripted, each role assigned, and he was the villain in their story. When it was Dr. Graves' turn to speak, Tyrell's skin burned. Graves had been appointed to the review board only a week earlier, a fact that had been brushed aside when Tyrell's legal advisor raised objections. Now he stood, polished and rehearsed, playing the role of concerned academic. "I was one of Mr. Monroe's instructors," Graves began. "He was talented, no question, but talent doesn't excuse recklessness. His behavior was erratic. He pursued fringe theories without peer oversight. Frankly, I worry about the example we set if we endorse this kind of academic conduct." Tyrell stared at him, disbelief curdling into rage. Graves continued, voice dripping with false compassion. "I don't believe Mr. Monroe acted maliciously. I think he got caught in his own ambition." The committee nodded slowly, like priests watching a confession. Tyrell couldn't breathe. This was institutional gaslighting. Slick, practiced, brutal. They had taken his mind, twisted it into a threat, and now with calculated precision, were preparing to erase him entirely. Sloan met him outside the building afterward. Tyrell didn't speak. He just handed Sloan the summary document, a 2-page assessment from the committee stating that while no definitive proof of plagiarism had been found, serious ethical concerns remain regarding the source, intent and conduct surrounding Mr. Monroe's public presentation of unverified theory. In other words, a stain that would never wash off. Sloan scanned the paper, his jaw tightening. "They're setting you up to be erased," he said quietly. "They'll never say it outright, but this document means no institution will touch you again. No grant, no lab, no invitation. You're radioactive." Tyrell felt hollow. "So what now? Do we just disappear?" Before Sloan could answer, Tyrell's phone buzzed. A new email. The sender wasn't familiar. Confidential.liaison. Ortex Global. He opened it. Tyrell Monroe. We've been following your work closely. It is brilliant, innovative, and disruptive in the best way possible. Ortex Global Tech is prepared to offer you a $10 million contract to further your research under our private R&D division. There's only one condition. Your name must never be associated with the published results. No authorship, no interviews, full anonymity. You will be paid. Your work will shape the future, but you will not be known. Let us know by Friday. Tyrell read the message 3 times. The words blurred. They were offering him the world, but only if he agreed to vanish from it. An international tech corporation offers Tyrell a $10 million contract, under the condition that his name never appears publicly. Tyrell stared at the screen, the offer burning into his eyes like a brand. $10 million, enough to pay off his family's mortgage, cover the medical debt his mother had carried since his father died, and live without fear of another tuition bill or eviction notice. The numbers were impossible to ignore. They weren't just digits, they were liberation, but so was his name. He sat in silence for hours, the glow of the laptop casting shadows on his wall of equations. Sloan was out of town, unreachable, and the weight of the decision pressed solely on Tyrell's chest. Could he accept the money, secure his family's future, and just disappear from the narrative? Let someone else carry the torch of his work? Or was anonymity a form of betrayal? The next morning, he called his mom. She didn't know the full extent of the situation. Tyrell had shielded her from the worst of it, but he could hear the weariness in her voice. "Ma," he said quietly, "if I had a way to end all this, and make sure you never have to work again, but no one would ever know it came from me, would that be enough?" Her pause was heavy. "Baby, I want you safe, and I want you free. But if you're asking me whether hiding who you are is worth money, then you already know the answer." Tyrell closed his eyes. I needed to hear it. Later that afternoon, his inbox pinged. A short message from someone named Maritza Alonso, a freshman at a university in Arizona. Her note was raw, unpolished. "I watched your live stream. My professor told me my research idea was too urban-minded. I just wanted to study sound waves in underserved neighborhoods. He said I should focus on something more practical. I wanted to give up, but then I saw you fight back. Thank you." Tyrell read it twice. That night, he opened his live stream again. This time, he didn't present math. He presented the truth. He read the Ortex offer out loud, verbatim. He laid bare the condition. Brilliance in exchange for silence. Profit in exchange for erasure. He asked his viewers one question. What's the cost of being invisible forever? Within hours, the video exploded. Millions watched as Tyrell revealed what many suspected but few could prove, that corporate interests were more than willing to use black brilliance, so long as it remained faceless. The response was electric and volatile. News outlets tore him apart. The New York Times published a scathing editorial, "When Victimhood Becomes a Brand." Fox News aired a week-long series accusing Tyrell of orchestrating the backlash for personal fame. "He's not oppressed," one anchor sneered. "He's opportunistic." Tyrell's social media was flooded again, this time with accusations that he faked the Ortex offer, that he was lying about the racism, that he was making a career out of playing the race card. Even progressive spaces began to fracture. Some supporters worried that his public stance might damage future reform efforts. Others called him reckless. But something else began happening too. His inbox flooded again, not with trolls but with testimonies. Black and brown students from every corner of the country shared their stories. The chemistry student whose advisor refused to recommend her for internships. The mechanical engineer who was told he wasn't cut out for research. The Latina programmer who had her algorithm credited to a white classmate. Patterns emerged. Names. Departments. Whole institution. Then, on a quiet Sunday morning, Tyrell received an email from a civil rights legal team. "We've been watching closely. We believe there's legal precedent for a discrimination suit. Not just for you but for every student who's faced this kind of systemic sabotage." He called them the next day. Within a week, a press conference was announced. Tyrell stood at the center of a growing coalition. Dozens of students beside him, their faces tired but defiant. The lawsuit was ambitious. It named 5 universities, 15 professors, 3 corporate sponsors. The charge: systemic racial discrimination in STEM disciplines, including grade manipulation, research theft, and institutional retaliation. The media couldn't ignore it. The backlash, once so powerful, now began to fracture. And the institutions? They scrambled. Statements were released. Internal reviews announced. Some quietly tried to offer settlements. But Tyrell refused to settle. A class action lawsuit emerges. Black and brown students across the country are joining forces to sue multiple universities for systemic racism in STEM. Tyrell never intended to lead a movement. He wasn't trained in politics or activism. He didn't speak in slogans or organize rallies. He was a mathematician, quiet, meticulous, and fiercely focused. But injustice doesn't wait for permission to choose its champions. Sometimes it forces them into the spotlight. The class action lawsuit sent shockwaves through the academic world. For the first time, systemic racism in STEM was not a whisper in closed dorm rooms. It was front-page news. Overnight, Tyrell's name transformed from a cautionary tale into a symbol. STEM justice exploded across platforms, millions of posts, stories, and testimonies pouring in from students and alumni nationwide. College campuses erupted in protest. At Harvard, black and brown students marched with banners quoting Tyrell's live stream. At UCLA, students occupied a math department building demanding transparency. At MIT, a group staged a sit-in, refusing to leave until their university audited grading practices over the last 10 years. And Tyrell? He watched it unfold with disbelief. He had been dragged through the mud, mocked, suspended, and labeled unstable. But now the world was listening, and more importantly, questioning. He received invitations to speak on news segments, to guest lecture, to appear on panels. He declined most of them. He didn't trust the media, and he didn't want to be molded into anyone's narrative. The only platform he returned to was his live stream. "I didn't start this to become a symbol," he told his viewers. "I just wanted the truth to matter." But whether he liked it or not, Tyrell Monroe had become more than a student. He was now a rallying cry. Meanwhile, the lawsuits dug deeper. In the process of collecting testimonies, Tyrell's legal team received anonymous files exposing something explosive. Several former students of Dr. Ellison Graves came forward, detailing years of biased grading, exclusion from research opportunities, and intimidation tactics. Then came the leak. A folder labeled Graves Grap Chat Logs was uploaded to Pastebin. It contained screenshots of a private messaging group where Graves and several other faculty members shared memes, mocking minority students, discussed weeding out the unqualified, and referred to Tyrell and others with slurs and dehumanizing language. The internet detonated. Within hours, hashtags like Graves Exposed and Purge STEM trended globally. Protesters showed up outside the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences, holding signs that read, "This is what academic racism looks like." Tyrell was never the problem. The university issued a statement promising a thorough investigation, but the damage was done. Within a week, Graves was placed on indefinite administrative leave. Tyrell watched it unfold from his apartment. Numb. He should have felt vindicated, but instead he felt hollow. It had taken public shaming, digital warfare, and collective outrage to get the world to believe what he had been saying all along. Sloan, now back in town and recovering from a brief illness, came over one evening. He stood in front of Tyrell's wall of equations and nodded slowly. "They tried to bury you," he said, "and you became the seed." Tyrell chuckled softly. "I don't know what I became." That night, his university emailed him with an unexpected subject line: "Proposal for reinstatement." The message was formal, sanitized, and dripping in liability management. They offered to reinstate Tyrell's student status, restore his scholarship, and even feature him in a new diversity and innovation campaign. But there was a catch: a legally binding non-disclosure agreement. He wouldn't be allowed to discuss the suspension, or the harassment, or the theory that had started it all. In short, accept the redemption, but erase the truth. He read it twice. Then again. Each sentence twisted the knife deeper. They didn't want to make things right. They wanted to package his silence. He sat with it for a day, replaying everything in his mind: the classroom humiliation, the digital lynching, the sleepless nights, the hidden emails, the protests. The choice wasn't just about himself anymore. It was about everyone who had ever been told their brilliance was too loud, too bold, too black. So he declined. And the next day he went live again. This time, there were no cameras, no branded backdrops. Just Tyrell, a dry erase board, and a USB stick. "I was offered reinstatement," he began. but only if I agreed to disappear. He held up the USB. This contains the full theory. Every line, every proof, every breakthrough. You don't need a degree to understand it. You just need curiosity. He uploaded it to an open-source science platform, used by independent researchers worldwide. Then he linked it on every social media account he had left. No NDAs, no gatekeepers, no paywalls. It belongs to everyone now. In under 24 hours, the file was downloaded 800,000 times. By the end of the week, it crossed 3.5 million. Educators began teaching it. Engineers adapted it. Students from community colleges and underserved schools wrote to Tyrell, saying it was the first time they'd seen complex math explained in a way that welcomed them. For the first time, his work wasn't just accepted. It was celebrated. But the silence from the institutions remained. Then, something unexpected happened. Tyrell declines and releases his full theory, open source to the world. Tyrell didn't sleep the night after releasing his full theory online. He lay on his mattress, staring at the ceiling. His mind swarmed with anxiety and wonder. What would happen now that his life's work torn from him, rejected, and weaponized, was finally free? The world answered quickly. Within days, Tyrell's open-source upload rippled through the scientific underground, like electricity through wire. Independent researchers, tinkering engineers, college dropouts, and global STEM outliers pounced on the equations with intensity. They didn't care about credentials. They weren't part of the ivory tower. They cared about the math. And the math worked. First came the emails. A small lab in Belgium used Tyrell's decay model to recalibrate a battery cell for a solar farm, increasing output by 20. A self-taught engineer in Brazil reported that her cooling system prototype, previously unstable, now operated at 96% efficiency after integrating Tyrell's thermal decay corrections. Then a freelance physics collective in Indonesia sent video proof. Using his matrix, they managed to stabilize a satellite signal delay caused by atmospheric interference. The math wasn't just theoretical anymore. It was real. It was solving problems. It was rewriting science. But the reactions weren't all celebratory. As Tyrell's model spread like wildfire across global communities, the academic establishment began to splinter. Some hailed him as the future, a necessary disruption in an outdated system built on hierarchy and exclusion. University forums debated whether peer review had become more about protecting prestige than pursuing truth. Others painted him as a virus, an unregulated anomaly, infecting the purity of science. Editorials in academic journals warned of chaotic decentralization. One particularly sharp critique, titled "Mathematics Without a Map: The Dangers of Digital Rebellion," accused Tyrell of encouraging pseudo-scientific anarchy by removing institutional filters. Without oversight, it read, "We invite chaos disguised as progress." Tyrell read the piece aloud on livestream. He didn't flinch. "The chaos," he said, "was already here. I just turned the lights on." But the pushback went far beyond words. Online threats surged, the kind that made your skin crawl. Photos of Tyrell's childhood home in Detroit surfaced online, paired with captions like, "Let's remind this punk where he came from." Racist message boards dissected his live streams, searching for flaws, mocking his appearance, and sharing deepfake videos painting him as unstable, dangerous, even violent. One doctored clip claimed to show Tyrell admitting to stealing research from real scientists. It racked up 500,000 views before it was debunked. His mother received phone calls in the middle of the night. The threats escalated. Some subtle, others explicit. Tyrell's legal team contacted the authorities. Within 48 hours, the FBI confirmed a credible threat against his life. They recommended immediate relocation. His family was moved to protective housing under an alias. Tyrell stayed behind, refusing to hide. "I won't vanish," he told Sloan, voice tight with exhaustion. Not again. But the stress carved into him, like stone. He was thinner now, quieter. His once bright eyes carried weight. Even Sloan noticed it. "You're still in the fire," he said, "but don't let it burn out the best parts of you." Amid the storm, a beacon cut through. One morning, buried among hundreds of messages, Tyrell opened a video sent from Johannesburg. A young black student stood in front of a crowd, accepting a Global Innovation Award. She wore a silver head wrap and spoke with precision and power. "In our country," she said, "we've long been told that we must import genius from the West. But this time, we built it ourselves, with help from a brilliant mind who wasn't afraid to share his work when no one else would." She held up a prototype, a sleek, small box. explaining it used Tyrrell's decay theory to trigger cloud condensation through micropressure systems, a weather modification breakthrough. As the crowd stood to applaud, she looked into the camera and smiled. "Thank you, Tyrell Monroe. We see you." Tyrrell watched in silence, tears streaming down his face. He didn't know her name yet, but she had just used his math to change the weather. A black student in South Africa uses Tyrell's math to launch a weather modification startup and wins a Global Innovation Award. The letter came sealed in an embossed envelope, bearing the crest of the International Science Federation. Tyrell opened it cautiously, still battle-worn from the chaos of the past year. He half expected another threat, another accusation. Instead, the letterhead announced something surreal. "Dear Mr. Monroe, we are honored to invite you to speak as a keynote presenter at the 74th Annual Global Science Frontiers Conference in Geneva, Switzerland." For a long moment, he just stared at the words, barely breathing. This wasn't a podcast invite. It wasn't a student panel or a social media campaign. This was the conference attended by Nobel laureates, groundbreaking researchers, and the elite minds of modern science. An event that had never in its history invited a college student to speak, let alone a suspended one, let alone him. He showed the letter to Sloan, who took it with trembling hands. "You cracked the dam, kid," he said softly. "Now the water's coming through." The plan moved quickly. Travel arrangements, visa paperwork, talk drafts. Tyrrell spent hours preparing a 20-minute speech titled Uncontained Energy, the Future of Open Source Science. It was daring, defiant, and poetic. His math wouldn't just be explained, it would be felt. But 3 days before departure, the second letter arrived. This one digital, cold, and laced with apology. Due to concerns raised by affiliated academic institutions regarding ongoing controversies, we must regrettably withdraw our invitation. Attached were signatories, 5 elite U.S. universities, 3 of which were named in Tyrrell's class action lawsuit. The pressure had come fast and quiet, threats of withdrawal, sponsor pullouts, and whispered implications of protest. They hadn't discredited his math. They had discredited him. Tyrrell didn't cry. He didn't curse. He just sat at the kitchen table, fingers pressed against his temples, his entire body still. Sloan walked in, and without a word, placed a steaming mug of coffee in front of him. "They still don't get it," he muttered. "The moment you gave your theory away, you stopped needing their permission." The next morning, Tyrrell booked his own flight. He flew to Geneva, not to enter the conference hall, but to stand outside it. Dressed in a simple charcoal blazer and black jeans, Tyrrell set up a single tripod and a handheld mic just across the street from the towering glass facade of the Geneva Convention Center. Behind him, a modest crowd gathered, some curious, others holding signs of support. Then, he went live. "Good morning," he said, the Alps rising behind him, the sound of passing cars bleeding into his voice. "I was supposed to be in that building today, but apparently, I still make people uncomfortable." He smiled, only slightly. "So, I'll give my talk out here instead, on the sidewalk, because science doesn't belong behind velvet ropes." And then he began. He spoke not just of decay theory and dimensional entropy, but of erasure, of what it means to be brilliant and black in a world that only applauds you once it's certain you've been broken, of how gatekeeping, elitism, and institutional racism had hijacked knowledge for too long. "Science," he said, "is not the property of the powerful. It is the pulse of the curious." By the time he finished, over 10,000 people had gathered on the sidewalk. Local news crews filmed every second. More than 50 million people watched the stream globally. He ended the speech with a simple truth. "You didn't stop me. You amplified me." The clip made headlines the world over. Banned from the stage, Tyrrell Monroe rewrites the rules outside it. The future of science is on the sidewalk. The speech that dismantled scientific elitism. Even outlets that had once mocked him began shifting their tone. Editors published walkbacks. Influencers who once doubted him quietly deleted old tweets. For the first time, Tyrrell's name wasn't followed by the words controversial or unproven. It was followed by resilient, visionary, undeniable. And then, without fanfare, Dr. Ellison Graves resigned from his position at the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences. The official statement cited personal reasons, but no one needed an explanation. The leaked group chats, the mounting student testimonies, and the growing public outrage had sealed his fate. Graves didn't just leave the university, He disappeared entirely from academic circles. Sloan watched the resignation headline on TV, with a flat expression. "Funny," he said. "The man who laughed you out of class isn't even worth a footnote now." But the biggest twist was still to come. 1 week later, Tyrell received an encrypted email from a private IP, routed through multiple servers. It contained only a single sentence. "This message will self-delete in 60 seconds. You have been nominated for the Nobel Prize in Physics." Tyrell froze. The message vanished before he could even reply. He thought it was a prank, a hoax. Until 2 days later, a whistleblower inside the Nobel nomination committee leaked an internal list to an investigative journalist. On it, among the world's most decorated physicists and billion-dollar research teams, was his name, Tyrell J. Monroe. Age 20. Status, independent. Nominated for theoretical physics. The media went into a frenzy. Tyrell is nominated for a Nobel Prize by a secret committee, but the nomination is leaked, causing scandal. The leak spread like a controlled explosion, strategic, unstoppable, and impossible to contain. Within minutes, Tyrell Monroe's name trended worldwide again, but this time not as a meme or target. It was on the short list for the Nobel Prize in Physics, not a prediction, not a possibility, a formal, committee-backed nomination. The internet cracked open. On one side, the nomination was hailed as poetic justice. The young black man who had been ridiculed, erased, suspended, and threatened had climbed the steepest mountain in science and planted a flag. Social media flooded with the hashtag #NobelPharrell, accompanied by clips of his sidewalk speech in Geneva, his open-source live streams, and students around the globe solving equations on whiteboards bearing his name. But the opposition came just as fast. Right-wing media lit up like wildfire. Talk show hosts called the nomination an academic affirmative action stunt. One popular anchor sneered into the camera, "This is what happens when we let social justice dictate science. It's not about equations anymore, it's about identity politics." Radio pundits mocked his lack of a PhD, his livestream origins, his uncivil approach to academia. Political figures joined the outrage, calling for the Nobel Committee to rescind the nomination. A congressional candidate from Texas tweeted, "Tyrell Monroe represents the collapse of academic standards. Excellence is now optional." Tyrell watched it all unfold from his apartment, shoulders tight, phone buzzing every few seconds with notifications he couldn't bear to read. Sloan sat across from him, scrolling through responses on his laptop. "They're scared," Sloan said. "That's all this is. They've spent decades building walls you just walked through." But it didn't feel like victory. Tyrell's alma mater, the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences, released a short statement the day after the leak. "While we do not comment on individual students, we are proud of our long-standing commitment to scientific rigor and institutional integrity." It was a masterclass in erasure. They didn't say his name. They didn't claim him. They pretended he had never existed. That silence stung more than the noise. But across the Atlantic, the tone was different. I allowed fear to override truth. Tyrell Monroe's contributions are real. They deserve recognition. In South Africa, the young woman who had launched the weather modification startup held a press conference. Her voice trembled, but her words were steel. "When the institutions refused to teach us the future, Tyrell handed it to us freely." Academics from India, Nigeria, France, and Brazil followed suit. Citations of Tyrell's decay theory flooded journals, over 300 within 6 months, across disciplines from quantum computing to environmental engineering. He had done the impossible. He had cracked through the wall, and now, the world outside the gate was building with his bricks. But the US remained divided. The same country that birthed him now questioned whether his name belonged among the immortals of science. And beneath the noise, Tyrell felt tired. One night, as the sun dipped below the Boston skyline, Tyrell sat with Sloan in his tiny kitchen. A half-empty mug of cold tea sat between them. The silence had weight. "Do you regret it?" Sloan asked finally. "All of it." Tyrell thought for a long moment. "No," he said. "But I didn't expect the cost." Sloan nodded, his face drawn with exhaustion. It was always going to cost, especially when the genius is black. Later that week, Tyrell found himself alone, preparing slides for a virtual lecture with a European think tank. Sloan hadn't responded to his texts that morning, which was unusual. He tried calling. No answer. Something twisted in his gut. He grabbed his jacket and sprinted the 6 blocks to Sloan's apartment. The building manager let him in without question. Inside, everything was quiet. Too quiet. Books were still stacked on every surface. A kettle sat unused on the stove. But something was wrong. Tyrell called out once, then again. No reply. He found Sloane in the living room, slumped in his armchair, one hand clutching a small, sealed envelope. His eyes were closed. Tyrell rushed to his side, heart pounding. He shook him gently. No response. Paramedics would later confirm it was a stroke. Quick, quiet, almost peaceful. But Tyrell didn't feel peace. He felt a hollow tear rip through his chest. The man who had believed in him when no one else had gone. In his hand, Tyrell found the envelope. Written on the front, in Sloane's unmistakable script, for Tyrell. When the noise gets too loud, Dr. Sloane collapses in his apartment, leaving behind a sealed letter addressed to Tyrell. Tyrell sat in the center of Sloane's apartment, surrounded by the wreckage of a mind that had never stopped working. The place felt like a shrine, walls lined with chalkboard paint, formulas etched into every surface, notes taped to ceilings, book spines worn thin from obsessive flipping. But today the apartment was quiet, hollow, like the silence knew it had taken something sacred. He held the sealed letter with trembling hands. The envelope was thick, sealed with a single strip of black wax, Sloane's initials carved crudely into it. H.S. Tyrell didn't open it immediately. For a long time he just sat, unsure if he was ready to know what final truth Sloane had carried with him into death. Eventually he tore it open. Inside, a single handwritten letter stretched across 5 dense pages, each line pulsing with urgency, weight, and something else: confession. Tyrell, if you're reading this, it means I finally lost the race between my mind and my body. I hate that I left this world without seeing yours fully claim it. But you need to know something. Your decay theory isn't just about energy. It's about time. Back in the 80s, I worked with a joint research team that included theoretical physicists, military consultants, and yes, defense contractors. We were experimenting with models that could explain entropy in relation to spatial collapse. I saw something in your math, something I hadn't dared revisit in decades. It's not just a better way to harness energy, it's a new way to view the universe. Tyrell stopped, breath shallow. He scanned ahead. They shelved it, suppressed it, not because it was wrong, but because it came from us, from me, and from others who looked like me. They labeled our work theoretical excess, and rerouted funding to white-led teams working on less volatile, more respectable models. I watched it happen over and over again. Ideas stolen, names forgotten, doors closed. So I went underground. I started documenting everything. Every theory, every proof, every conversation. You'll find the files in the false wall behind the bookshelf. Tyrell, your mind reopened what they buried. But be careful. You didn't just solve an equation. You touched something they've spent decades keeping hidden. Tyrell stood, his heart thundering in his chest. He moved to the bookcase and began removing volumes. At the back, just as Sloane had described, was a thin panel slightly misaligned from the wall. With a gentle push, it opened. Inside there were 3 locked black binders, a flash drive, and a rusted hard drive sealed in protective casing. He carried it all to the table, afraid even to breathe. Over the next 8 hours he read, and what he uncovered unraveled everything he thought he knew about why Sloane had taken him in, and what his own theory had really touched. There were scanned memos from classified labs, early-stage patents denied without reason, detailed records of theories eerily similar to Tyrell's decay matrix, all bearing the names of black and brown scientists, whose careers had vanished from public record. One file hit hardest, a joint research proposal from 1987 between Sloane and a Nigerian-born physicist named Dr. Adeobi Kaleki. The paper theorized the existence of entropy shadows, microscopic disruptions in localized time signatures. Tyrell's decay matrices overlapped almost perfectly with their projections. This wasn't just energy. This was time distortion, space-time. Sloane hadn't just been mentoring him. He had seen in Tyrell the continuation of a buried lineage. In that moment, Tyrell realized what his next move had to be. He couldn't just fight for validation anymore. He had to finish what they started. He began digitizing every document, creating secure backups, encrypting them in distributed nodes across multiple servers. He wrote annotations, cross-referenced equations, and rebuilt the missing frameworks left in Sloane's files. His live streams shifted tone from activism to instruction. He launched a digital archive called the Sloane Project, free and open source, with the goal of preserving and expanding suppressed black-led scientific theories. The response was overwhelming. Thousands of students, researchers, and independent thinkers joined the platform, submitting their own work, reviving erased names, and building on what Tyrell had now dubbed the Black Quantum Continuum. But Tyrell knew the silence wouldn't last. And it didn't. 2 weeks after the Sloan project went live, a journalist at The Intercept reached out. She had obtained a leaked internal memo from a U.S. defense agency, flagged top secret. She forwarded it to Tyrell without commentary. It was a short, chilling exchange between two military scientists, dated just months after Tyrell's first open-source upload. Initiate Phase 2. The decay vector model from the Monroe file has been successfully adapted into Prototype 1B. Effects on subatomic regulation confirmed. Weaponization pathway viable. Tyrell froze. They hadn't just studied his work, they had already weaponized it. A leaked memo from a U.S. defense agency shows they've already weaponized parts of Tyrell's theory. The leaked memo detonated across digital platforms like a truth bomb. Newsrooms scrambled to verify it, but the damage was done long before confirmation arrived. Major headlines blasted across the internet. Monroe's theory weaponized by U.S. military. Leaked memo confirms, from student to strategic threat, how Tyrell Monroe's math shook the defense world. Overnight, Tyrell's open-source decay model shifted from a scientific curiosity to a national security issue. The same government agencies that had ignored him now whispered about containment. But it was too late. His work had spread beyond borders, systems, and permissions, and now the world was responding. France introduced Monroe's decay matrix into its national science curriculum. Under a new section, Contemporary Open-Source Discoveries, South Korea began researching its use in low-energy transport systems. A Colombian engineering school launched a full academic fellowship in his name. In Ghana, students painted murals of Tyrell and Dr. Sloan on university walls. Mathematics reimagined as resistance. But not everyone celebrated. In the U.S., political lines hardened. 3 southern states introduced bills banning the teaching of unregulated theoretical models in public schools, widely seen as direct responses to Tyrell's influence. One senator called his work intellectual insurgency. Tyrell watched in disbelief as his name became a cultural litmus test. In some states, he was on science fair posters. In others, he was blacklisted from libraries. Meanwhile, investigations into faculty members at the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences gained traction. Dr. Graves' resignation had been the spark, but the fire spread quickly. Anonymous testimonies flooded hotlines, revealing a legacy of discrimination, grade tampering, and research theft. A formal inquiry launched. Names long protected by tenure now faced consequences. For Tyrell, vindication tasted complicated. "I never wanted this part," he told a group of student reporters. "Justice doesn't undo what was lost. But maybe it stops it from happening again." Still, he didn't slow down. Instead of retreating into the shadows, Tyrell launched the Sloan Monroe Institute, a privately funded, independently run research center dedicated to nurturing marginalized youth in STEM. Housed in a renovated manufacturing plant in Detroit, the institute offered full scholarships, open labs, and a digital classroom network that reached across continents. In its first year, over 11,000 students applied. The institute's motto, painted boldly at its entrance, read, "No doors, no permission, just possibility." Tyrell taught classes himself. He mentored directly. He live-streamed lectures and answered questions from kids in Nairobi, New Orleans, and Nepal. His goal wasn't just to teach science. It was to rebuild trust in the idea that genius could live anywhere, in any way. And slowly, the world took notice. His journey became a global case study in modern ethics, education, and racial equity in STEM. Universities revised curricula. Policy papers cited his rise as a signpost of systemic failure and a blueprint for resilience. The irony was not lost on him. He had been erased, and now they were writing entire textbooks about him. 1 year to the day after his suspension, Tyrell stood at the Sloan Monroe Institute, ready to begin a morning lecture. Before he could speak, his assistant entered, pale and shaking slightly, holding up a phone. "You need to see this, now." On the screen was a live national broadcast. A news anchor beamed with practiced poise. "In breaking news," she said, "the Boston Institute of Mathematical Sciences has just announced that Tyrell Monroe will be awarded an honorary doctorate, live, during this evening's televised awards gala. On the anniversary of his suspension, the same university offers Tyrell an honorary doctorate, live, on national television. The stage was drenched in gold light. Elegant velvet curtains framed the crowd of donors, deans, and dignitaries seated in rows like a ceremony of judgment and redemption. Tyrell Monroe stood just off stage, behind a curtain, heart steady, expression unrateable. He hadn't wanted to accept the honorary doctorate. His first instinct was to refuse it, to call out the hypocrisy of the same university that had once cast him out, now turning to embrace him, publicly, loudly, theatrically. But Sloane's letter had lingered in his mind, especially one line: "Don't waste your breath on revenge. Save it for when you have the mic." And tonight, he had the mic. He walked onto the stage not as a student, not as a symbol, but as something far greater, an architect of his own legacy. The applause swelled, unsure at first, then thunderous. Some clapped because they meant it, others because they were being watched. The university president, once silent during Tyrell's darkest hour, handed him a rolled scroll and a plaque. His eyes didn't meet Tyrell's. Tyrell took the mic. "I never thought I'd be back here," he said simply. Silent. He paused. "And I didn't come here for the title. This isn't about the degree. It's about the dignity we were denied." He spoke slowly, clearly, every word weighted with memory. He didn't name names. He didn't need to. The world already knew the story. "I was laughed at," he said. "Dismissed. Labeled arrogant for daring to see what others refused to. But I didn't come back to repay humiliation. I came back to say, we're still here." He let the moment breathe. "This degree," he continued, holding the plaque slightly in the air, "isn't just mine. It's Sloane's. It's my mother's. It's for every student who was told you're not ready, when what they really meant was you're not white." A few in the crowd shifted uncomfortably. Others leaned forward. "They didn't want us in the room," Tyrell said. "So we built our own." The audience erupted. Some stood, others wiped tears. In the weeks that followed, his speech was replayed across networks. It became required viewing in college seminars. Tyrell's name was no longer just associated with scandal or rebellion. It was equated with revolution. Students of color in India, South Africa, Brazil, the UK and beyond began citing Monroe's decay matrix in their own research. Entire institutions began re-evaluating their admissions processes and mentorship pipeline. Tyrell didn't stop. He expanded the Sloan Monroe Institute into satellite branches across 3 continents. He created fellowships, open-access AI labs, and a digital mentorship hub connecting underserved high school students with world-class scientists. He wasn't just changing the conversation. He was changing the system. In Detroit, he sat with his mother on the porch, watching the sky turn violet. "They still talk about you like a myth," she said. Tyrell smiled softly. "Myth is just truth people were too scared to believe." And far away, in a small bedroom in rural Georgia, a young black girl named Alina Washington sat cross-legged with a tablet glowing in her lap. She had watched every Tyrell Monroe livestream, printed out his equations. She couldn't understand all of them, not yet, but she understood enough to believe she could do what he did. Alina uploaded her first science theory to the Sloan Project at 2:41 a.m., a radical idea about sound wave acceleration using decaying resonance. At the top of her paper, she wrote, "Inspired by Tyrell Monroe." As the credits roll, a young girl in Georgia uploads her own radical science theory, with Tyrell's open-source math at its core. They tried to erase him with silence, with shame, with power. But truth doesn't vanish. It multiplies. If you've ever been underestimated, overlooked, or told you don't belong, this story was for you. Type yes if you believe brilliance has no color. Subscribe if this broke your heart, and lit a fire.